everyone, this is Kavya from Edureka. Welcome to today's session on DevOps interview. Now kindly take up this time to subscribe to us and do not forget to hit that bell icon to never miss an update from the Edureka YouTube channel. Also, to learn more about new trending technologies, visit our page, the link to which is given in the description box below. Now without much ado, let's get started. Let's address the main topic of today's session, that is DevOps interview questions and answers. There are different topics that we'll be covering in the session today. That is questions on general DevOps, programming, version control, continuous integration, continuous testing, configuration management, continuous monitoring, and finally containerization and virtualization. So without much ado, let's talk about general DevOps interview questions and answers. The first question is, what are the fundamental differences between DevOps and Agile? So the first feature that we'll be addressing today is the agility. So in DevOps, the agility is seen in both development and operations, whereas the agility in Agile is only seen in the development side. The second difference is between the processes or practices. In DevOps, it involves different processes such as continuous integration, continuous development, continuous testing, etc. Whereas in Agile, it involves practices such as Agile Scrum, Agile Kanban, etc. The key focus area in DevOps is timeliness and quality, whereas in Agile, timeliness is the main priority. The next feature that we'll be talking about is release cycles or development sprints. In DevOps, smaller release cycles are implemented with immediate feedback, whereas in Agile, there is only smaller release cycles. The next feature that we'll be talking about is the source of feedback. In DevOps, feedback is from self-monitoring tools, whereas in Agile, it's from customers. And finally, the scope of work in DevOps is agility and the need for automation, whereas in Agile, it's only agility. I hope the fundamental differences between DevOps and Agile is clear based on the different features that are available. The next question is, what is the need for DevOps? According to me, this answer should start by explaining the general market trend. Instead of releasing big sets of features, companies are trying to see if small features can be transported to their customers through a series of release trains. This has many advantages like quick feedback from customers, better quality of software, etc., which in turn leads to high customer satisfaction. So to achieve this, companies are required to lower failure rate of new releases, increase deployment frequency, shorten lead time between fixes, faster mean time to recovery in the event of new release crashing. DevOps fulfills all of these requirements and helps in achieving seamless software delivery. You can give examples of companies like Etsy, Google, and Amazon, which have adopted DevOps to achieve levels of performance that were unthinkable even 5 years ago. They are doing tens, hundreds, or even thousands of code deployments per day while delivering world-class stability, reliability, and security. The next question is, how is DevOps different from Agile or software development lifecycle? Now, Agile is a set of values and principles about how to produce, that is, how to develop software. Example, if you have some ideas and you want to turn these ideas into working software, you can use the Agile values and principles as a way to do it. But that software might only be working on a developer's laptop or in a test environment. Now, if you want to quickly, easily, and repeatedly move that software into production infrastructure in a safe, simple, and yet efficient manner, DevOps is definitely the way. To do that, you need to understand DevOps tools and techniques. You can summarize by saying Agile software development methodology focuses on the development of software, but DevOps, on the other hand, is responsible for development as well as the deployment of the software in the safest and most reliable way possible. Now, moving on, which are the top DevOps tools? How do all of these work together? The most popular DevOps tools are Git for version control system, Jenkins for continuous integration, Selenium for continuous testing, Puppet, Chef, Ansible are the configuration management and deployment tools, Nagios is used for continuous monitoring, finally Docker is used for containerization. You can also mention any other tool if you want, but make sure you talk about all the tools that you can see on the screen right now. Now, the second part of the answer has two possibilities. Now, if you have experience with all of the tools that I just mentioned, then you can just say that I've worked on all of these tools for developing good quality software and deploying those softwares easily, frequently, and reliably. If you have experience only with some of the tools, then you can just mention those tools and say that I have specialization in these tools and have an overview about the rest of the tools. Now let's talk about a generic logical flow where everything gets automated for seamless delivery. However, this flow may vary from organization to organization as per the requirement. Firstly, developers develop the code, and this source code is managed by version control system tools like Git. Developers send this code to Git repository, and any changes made in the code is committed to this particular repository. Now, Jenkins pulls this code from the repository using the Git plugin and builds it using tools like Ant or Maven. Configuration management tools like Puppet deploys and provisions testing environment, and then Jenkins releases this code on the test environment on which testing is finally done using tools like Selenium. Once the code is tested, Jenkins sends it for deployment on the production server. Even the production server is provisioned and maintained by tools like Puppet. After deployment, it is continuously monitored by tools like Nagios. Docker containers provide a testing environment to test the build features. I hope how all of these work together is clear. Now let's move on to the next question. What is the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment? Continuous delivery ensures code can be safely deployed onto production, whereas in continuous deployment, every change that passes the automated tests is deployed to production automatically. Continuous delivery also ensures business applications and servers function as expected. On the other hand, in continuous deployment, it makes software development and the release process faster and more robust. In continuous delivery, it delivers every change to a production-like environment through rigorous automated testing. But in continuous deployment, there is no explicit approval from a developer and requires a developed culture of monitoring. I hope the differences between continuous delivery and continuous deployment is clear. You can say so much to the interviewer. He's going to be more than happy. Now, what are the advantages of DevOps? Now, for this answer, you can use your past experience and explain how DevOps helped you in your previous job. Now, if you do not have any such experience, then you can simply mention the technical and business benefits of DevOps. The technical benefits of DevOps is it allows continuous software delivery. There are also less complex problems to fix, and also there is a faster resolution of problems. The business benefits, on the other hand, are it enables faster delivery of features, there is more stable operating environments, and most importantly, there's more time available to add value rather than to fix or maintain. What is the most important thing DevOps help us to achieve? The most important thing that DevOps helps us achieve is to get the changes into production as quickly as possible while minimizing risks in software quality assurance and compliance. This is the primary objective of DevOps. However, you can add many other positive effects of DevOps. For example, clearer communication and better working relationships between teams, that is, both the operations and development teams collaborate together to deliver good quality software, which in turn leads to higher customer satisfaction. Moving on, explain with a use case where DevOps can be used in industry or real life. There are many industries that are using DevOps, so you can mention any of those use cases like Amazon, Google, Netflix, etc. Or you can simply talk about Etsy. Etsy is a peer-to-peer e-commerce website focused on handmade or vintage items and supplies, as well as unique factory manufactured items. Etsy initially struggled with slow, painful site updates that frequently caused the site to go down. It affected sales for millions of Etsy users who sold goods through online marketplace and risked driving them to the competitor. With the help of a new technical management team, Etsy transitioned from its waterfall model, which produced 4-hour full site deployments twice weekly, to a more agile approach. Today, it has a fully automated deployment pipeline, and its continuous delivery practices have reportedly resulted in more than 50 deployments a day with fewer disruptions. So basically, Etsy employed continuous integration pipeline into their daily deployment activities, and this eventually resulted in more deployments per day. The next question is, explain your understanding and expertise on both the software development side and the technical operations side of an organization you have worked in the past. Now, for this answer, share your past experience and try to explain how flexible you were in your previous job. You can refer this example. DevOps engineers almost always work in a 24/7 business critical online environment. I was adaptable to on-call duties and was available to take up real-time live system responsibility. I successfully automated processes to support continuous software deployments. I have experience with public or private clouds, tools like Chef or Puppet, scripting and automation with tools like Python and PHP, and also a background in Agile. So this is how you can explain your employer about how you have expertise and understanding on both the software development side and the technical operations side of your organization. Moving on, how will you approach a project that needs to implement DevOps? Now, the following standard approaches can be used to implement DevOps in a specific project. So in stage 1, you have to have an assessment of the existing process and implementation for about 2 to 3 weeks to identify areas of improvement so that the team can create a roadmap for the implementation. In stage 2, you create a proof of concept. Once it is accepted and approved, the team can start on the actual implementation and roll out of the project plan. Finally, in stage 3, the project is now ready for implementing DevOps by using tools like version control tools, integration tools, testing tools, deployment tools, delivery tools, and monitoring tools followed in each step. Now, by following the proper steps for version control, integration, testing, deployment, delivery, and monitoring, the project is now ready for DevOps implementation. Now, let's move on to the second part, that is programming. Here, I'll be discussing some programs that are commonly asked in a DevOps interview. Without much ado, let's check them out. So the first program that is commonly asked is FizzBuzz implementation. It is a very simple programming task where you have to print the numbers from 1 to 100. And if the number is a multiple of 3, then you should print the message fizz. If it's a multiple of 5, then it should print the message buzz. If it's a multiple of both, then it should print the message FizzBuzz. This is the logic of the program. It's extremely simple and commonly asked too. So FizzBuzz is one program that you should be thorough with. As you can see in the output, the multiples of 3 print fizz, the multiples of 5 print buzz, and the multiples of both 5 and 3, that is 15, prints FizzBuzz. I hope this is clear. You can see that they just used simply an if condition, elif condition, and then simply print the message. So one important programming task that is often asked, that is questions based on trees. So the first one is to detect the mirror of a tree. So here you have to check for 2 trees to be mirror images. So the following conditions must be true. The first one is the root nodes key must be the same. The second condition is the left subtree of left tree and right subtree of right tree have to be mirror images. And the third condition is that the right subtree of left tree and left subtree of right tree have to be mirror images. So here you have a binary tree node, which is class node, and then given 2 trees, say root 1 and root 2, return true if they are mirror of each other. Now the base case here is if both are empty, then just return true. Now if both are non-empty, compare them recursively. Note that in recursive calls, we pass left of one tree and right of the other tree. And this function, this if condition will check that. Then finally, we create the tree and see if both of these are mirror images of each other. If it is true, then it's going to print 1. If it is not symmetric, then it's going to print 0. If neither of the above conditions, like 2 conditions that have been satisfied, if it is true, then root 1 and root 2 are not mirror images. So then you can return false. Now you're creating the tree here and then just checking if it is symmetric. If it is, then it's going to print 1, else it's going to print 0. Because it is symmetric, you can see here that the node has 1 and the left node and right node has 2, 2. Left of left has 3 and left of right has 4 and right of left has 4 and right of right has 3. So it is symmetric, it's going to print 1 and that's your output. The next common question is finding the maximum height of a tree. So here you recursively calculate height of left and right subtrees of a node and assign height to the node as maximum of the heights of 2 children plus 1. So this is what the algorithm says. And first thing you'll have to do is you'll have to firstly create a constructor to create a new node.
and that's what you're going to initialize initially. After that, you compute the maximum depth or the height of a tree and the number of nodes along the longest part from the root node down to the farthest leaf node. Then you simply return the maximum height of the tree. Now we're just going to create a tree, and the height will be always +1, including the root. So this is the driver program to test the above function. And once you create your tree, you can simply print the height of the node. And this says 4, which is absolutely right. Moving on, we have to know another important program or logic of the serializing and unserializing a tree. So the question goes by, given the root to a binary tree, implement serialized root, which serializes the tree into a string, and deserialize, which deserializes the string back into the tree. So firstly, you'll have to create the binary tree using the node class. And once that is done, to serialize this tree into a string, you can see the serialize function here. And to serialize it into a string, you can consider the null nodes as hash. Starting from root, depth first search is used to traverse through the tree. Now, if a node exists, its value is appended to the string and the left subtree is traversed. This process really continues until there are no more children left. Then a hash is appended to the array and the recursive function is existed. Then the right subtree is traversed and the same process is followed all over again. The final resulting is string, and that is returned. To deserialize a string to form a tree, the first word in the space separated string is considered as the root. When a hash is encountered, it is considered as an empty node and none is returned. In the remaining cases, a new node with the value as the word is formed and the remaining string is traversed. So this function is recursively called until the end of the string is reached. You can see that string after serializing the node is returned and the assert is true. Depth first search is really important. Given a binary tree, you have to traverse it using depth first search using recursion. Unlike linear data structures, which have only one logical way to traverse them, trees can be traversed in two different ways. That is usually depth first search or breadth first search. If you're into coding, I'm sure you must be very much aware of DFS and BFS. Depth first search is basically a technique used for traversing a particular tree or graph. Here, backtracing is used for traversal. That is, in this traversal, first the deepest node is first visited and then backtraces to its parents' nodes if no sibling of that particular node really exists. In graphs, usually there are cycles and disconnectivity. Unlike graph, tree does not contain cycle and are always connected. So a DFS of a tree is relatively very easy. So as you can see here, firstly, we can begin from a node, then traverse its adjacent or children without caring about cycles. And if we begin from a single node and traverse this way, it is guaranteed that we traverse the entire tree as there is no disconnectivity. So you can do this in 3 different orders: in order traversal, or pre-order traversal, or even post-order traversal. So the first case is to print in order. In case of a binary search trees, in order traversal gives nodes in a non-decreasing order. To get nodes of binary search trees in non-decreasing order, a variation of in order traversal where in order traversals reversed can be used. The next function is post-order traversal, which is useful to get the postfix expression of an expression tree. This is simple too. And finally, pre-order. Pre-order traversal is used to really create a copy of the tree. It is also used to get the prefix expression of an expression tree. I hope this is clear. You're just going to print each of the order in which the binary tree is. So it really traverses the tree in a particular order, and post-order traverses the left tree, then the right tree, and then visits the root. Whereas an in-order traverses the left tree, then it visits the root and then traverses the right subtree. Whereas in pre-order, it visits the root first, then traverses the left subtree, and then finally traverses the right subtree. And then it prints accordingly to that order. So you have a tree of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then accordingly it just prints according to its traversal and how it moves. Recursively, it prints the order of the tree. So here you can see that in pre-order traversal, it first traverses the root, and then it traverses the left subtree, that's 2, and then 4, and then finally it will come back to the right subtree, that is, then it touches 5 and then comes back to 3. The same way in order and post order traversals is printed too. On the other hand, a level order traversal of a tree is breadth first traversal for the tree. So we're going to use Q. With the help of Qs, we are going to implement breadth first search. Here we're going to firstly create an empty queue for level order traversal, and then we will append the queue with the root. We will loop the queue until the length of the queue is greater than 0. We will loop this entire function and we will print the queue's data. NQ the node's children, first left then right children, DQ a node from Q. And finally, we will print the level order traversal of the binary tree. The next important function or program is the topological sort. Topological sorting for directed acyclic graph is a linear ordering of vertices such that for every directed edge u, v, vertex u comes before v in the ordering. Topological sorting for a graph is not possible if the graph is not a directed acyclic graph. So in depth first search, we print a vertex and then recursively call DFS for its adjacent vertices. But in topological sorting, we need to print a vertex before its adjacent vertices. That's the difference between DFS and depth first search and topological sort. We can modify DFS to find topological sorting of a graph. In DFS, we start from a vertex, we first print it, and then recursively call DFS for its adjacent vertices. In topological sorting, we use a temporary stack. We do not print the vertex immediately. We first recursively call topological sorting for all its adjacent vertices, then push it onto a stack. Finally, print contents of the stack. It's important to know that a vertex is pushed to stack only when all of its adjacent vertices are already in the stack. So I hope topological sorting makes sense. So what they really do here is you're really having a function. You have to create a class to represent a graph. Then you are adding a function to add an edge to the graph. A recursive function is called to use the topological sort. So you have to mark the current node as visited and recursively visit all the vertices adjacent to that particular vertex. Finally, you push the current vertex to stack, which stores the final result. And then you have to write down the function to do the topological sort. That is, you repeatedly call the above function. And then you finally call the function to do this topological sort. You also should call the recursive function. Also, you should call the recursive helper function to store topological sorting starting from all vertices one by one. Then finally, you print the contents of the stack. Here we are printing the contents of the stack in a reverse order. So it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. You'll have to create the graph and then finally call the function, which will eventually print the graph in a reverse order. I hope this is clear. Moving on to another important topic, that is sets. You'll have to know basic functions like removing duplicates. Here you're defining a function named remove duplicates. Firstly, you're going to convert the array into set and then eventually into a list. You're going to define the array and then print it. So if you know Python, I'm sure you must be very aware of this. Next is to detect duplicates. Here we're simply going to use set, which is going to be traversing through the entire list of elements that you've mentioned. And in this particular list that you've defined, if the count of the data within the set is repeating or has occurred more than once, then you're simply going to not include them in your output. So if the data or the elements within the list has occurred more than once, then it is simply going to keep a count of it and going to display that in its output. Strings are another important topic. So in strings, it's extremely easy. They're simple programs. With the help of slicing in Python, you can reverse a string by using -1, and it's just going to print the reverse of a particular string that you're going to incorporate. So the length of a string can be obtained by using the len method. You're simply going to use it with print, and then it will simply print the number of elements in your string. Another important program that you'll have to be thorough with is permutations. Different kinds of permutation and combination programs can be asked in your DevOps interview. A Python program to print all permutation using library functions. You can use the permutations, you can import the permutations library and then use it. The types of permutations that can occur with the three numbers, say 1 to 3, and this will print the different combinations that can occur with the three numbers, that's 1 to 3. So permutations is another important topic that you must be aware of. A Python program to print all permutation using library functions permutation can be used if you are very familiar with Python. So here, as you can see, I want the permutations of three numbers, 1 to 3. I'm going to define a variable and use the function permutations with three numbers, that is 1 to 3. And this will print out a list of all the possible permutations of these three numbers. You can see the output. So these are some of the programs. Even quick sort, merge sort, those are really important. You'll have to know the basic functions of programs that can be asked. I'm not saying that these programs are compulsorily asked in a DevOps interview, but these are the ones that have commonly been asked. So that's why I have made a list of all of the programs. So I hope this is clear, and let's move on to the next topic without much ado.
Now let's move on to the third part of this DevOps interview questions and answer session. So the first question that we'll be addressing in the version control is, what is version control and its benefits? Now, version control is a system that records changes to a file or set of files over time so that you can recall specific versions later. Version control systems consist of a central shared repository where teammates can commit changes to a file or set of files. Then you can mention the uses of version control. Version control allows you to revert files back to a previous state. It also allows you to revert the entire project back to a previous state. It can compare changes over time, see who last modified something that might be causing a problem. Also, it allows you to check who introduced an issue and at what time. Now let's move on and talk about some of the benefits of version control system. Now with the version control system, all the team members are allowed to work freely on any file at any time. It will later allow you to merge all the changes into a common version. Also, all the past versions and variants are neatly packed up inside the version control system. When you need it, you can request any version at any time and you'll have a snapshot of the complete project right at hand. Another benefit is that every time you save a new version of your project, version control system requires you to provide a short description of what was changed. Additionally, you can see what exactly was changed in a file's content. This allows you to know who has made what changes in the project at what time. The last benefit is that a distributed version control system like Git allows all the team members to have complete history of the project. So if there is a breakdown in the central server, you can use any of your teammates' local Git repository. The next question is, describe the various branching strategies you have used. This question is asked to test your branching experience, so tell them about how you have used branching in your previous job and what purpose does it serve. You can refer to the points that I'll be addressing now. The first type of branching is feature branching. A feature branch model keeps all of the changes for a particular feature inside of a branch. When the feature is fully tested and validated by automated tests, the branch is then merged into master. The second type of branching is task branching. In this model, each task is implemented on its own branch with the task key included in the branch name. It is easy to see which code implements which task. Just look for the task key in the branch name. The third type of branching is release branching. Once the developed branch has acquired enough features for a release, you can clone that branch to form a release branch. Creating this branch starts the next release cycle, so no new features can be added after this point. Only bug fixes, documentation generation, and other release-oriented tasks should go in this branch. Once it is ready to ship, the release gets merged into master and tagged with a version number. In addition, it should be merged back into develop branch, which may have progressed since the release was initiated. In the end, just mention that branching strategies vary from one organization to another, so you know the basic branching operations like delete, merge, checking out a branch, etc. The next important question is, what is Git? Git is a distributed version control system. It can track changes to a file and allows you to revert back to any particular change. Its distributed architecture provides many advantages over other version control systems like SVN. One major advantage is that it does not rely on a central server to store all the versions of a project's files. Instead, every developer clones a copy of a repository with a local repository and has the full history of the project on his or her hard drive, so that when there is a server outage, all you need for recovery is one of your teammates' local Git repository. There is a central cloud repository as well, where developers can commit changes and share it with other teammates. As you can see in the diagram, the distributed version control has a central repository, and each of the working copy or each of the developer have their own local repositories where they can make changes to regularly. And then if they want to push any of the changes to the central repository where their other teams can look upon it, they can easily do that using Git. Moving on to the next question in version control, how do you push a file from your local system to the GitHub repository using Git? Now, firstly, you have to connect the local repository to your remote repository by using the command git remote add origin and the web address. The example is given below: git remote add origin and the copied web address of my GitHub URL, that is https github.com/kavya-github test.git. Secondly, you have to push your file into a remote repository by using the command git push origin master. That is, you're pushing your file into the master branch. The next question is, how is a bare repository different from the standard way of initializing a Git repository? You can either do this by using the standard method, that is by using the git initialization command git init, and this will allow you to create a working directory. A .git subfolder is created with all the Git related revision history. The second way of doing this is by using the bare way, that is git init --bare. It does not contain any working or checked out a copy of source file. Bare repositories store Git revision history in the root folder of your repository instead of the .git subfolder. This is the difference between the standard method and the bare way. So in Git, how do you revert a commit that has already been pushed and made public? There can be two answers to this question, so make sure that you include both of these because they can be used depending on the situation. The first way is to remove or fix the bad file in a new commit and push it to a remote repository. This is the most natural way to fix an error. Once you've made the necessary changes to the file, commit it to the remote repository. For that, you can use git commit -n and commit message. Type in the commit message. The second way is to create a new commit that undoes all changes that were made in the bad commit. And to do this, you can use the command git revert name of the bad commit. I hope this is clear. Let's move on to the next question. What is git stash? Now, a Git developer working with the current branch wants to switch to another branch to work on something else, but the developer does not want to commit changes to your unfinished work. The solution to this particular issue is git stash. Git stash takes your modified tracked files and saves them on a stack of unfinished changes that you can reapply at any time. The next question is, what is git bisect? How can you use it to determine the source of a bug? I will suggest you to first give a small definition of git bisect. Git bisect is used to find the commit that introduced a bug by using binary search. The command for git bisect is git bisect, the subcommand and option commands. Now, since you've mentioned the command, explain what this command will do. This command uses a binary search algorithm to find which commit in your project's history introduced a bug. You use it by first telling it it's a bad commit that is known to contain the bug and a good commit that is known to be before the bug was introduced. Then git bisect picks a commit between these two endpoints and asks you whether the selected commit is good or bad. It continues narrowing down the range until it finds the exact commit that introduced the change. I hope git bisect and how it is used to determine a bug is easy and understandable. Moving on, what is git rebase and how can it be used to resolve conflicts in a feature branch before merge? According to me, you should start by saying git rebase is a command which will allow you to merge another branch into the branch where you are currently working on, and move all of the local commits that are ahead of the rebase branch to the top of the history of that particular branch. Now that you've defined what git rebase is, give an example or explain with an example to show how it can be used to resolve conflicts in a feature branch before merge.
Now, since you have defined Git rebase, now explain it with an example. If a feature branch was created from master, and since then the master branch has received new commits, Git rebase can be used to move the feature branch to the tip of master. The command effectively will replay the changes made in the feature branch at the tip of master, allowing configs to be resolved in the process. When done with care, this will allow the feature branch to be merged into master with relative ease and sometimes as a simple fast-forward operation. How do you find a list of files that is changed in a particular commit? For this answer, instead of just telling the command, explain what exactly this command will do. So you can say that to get a list files that has changed in a particular commit, use the command git diff -tree -r#. To get a list files that has changed in a particular commit, use command git diff -tree -r and the particular hash. Given the commit hash, this will list all the files that were changed or added in that particular commit. The -r flag makes the command list individual files rather than collapsing them into root directory names only. You can also say that the output will also include some extra information which can be easily suppressed by including two flags, git diff -tree -no commit id -name only -r#. Here -no commit id will suppress the commit hashes from appearing in the output, and -name only will only print the file names instead of the paths. I hope this is clear. Moving on, how do you set up a script to run every time a repository receives new commits through push? There are three ways to configure a script to run every time a repository receives new commits through push. One needs to define either a pre-receive, update, or a post-receive hook depending on when exactly the script needs to be triggered. Pre-receive hook in the destination repository is invoked when commits are pushed to it. Any script bound to this hook will be executed before any references are updated. This is a very useful hook to run scripts that help enforce development policies. Update hook works in a very similar manner to pre-receive hook and is also triggered before any updates are actually made. However, the update hook is called once for every commit that has been pushed to the destination repository. Finally, a post-receive hook in the repository is invoked after the updates have been accepted into the destination repository. This is an ideal place to configure simple deployment scripts, invoke some continuous integration systems, dispatch notification emails to repository maintainers, etc. Hooks are local to every Git repositories and are not versioned. Scripts can either be created within the hooks directory inside the .git directory, or they can be created elsewhere and links to those scripts can be placed within the directory. Now let us look at continuous integration interview questions. The first one is, what is meant by continuous integration? Continuous integration is a development practice that requires developers to integrate code into a shared repository several times a day. Each check-in is then verified by an automated build, allowing teams to detect problems early. I also suggest that you explain how you have implemented this in your previous job. You can refer to the diagram that is given here. Here, as you can see, developers first check out code into their private workspaces, and then when they're done with it, they commit the changes to the shared repository, that is the version control repository. Then the continuous integration server monitors the repository and checks out changes when they occur. The continuous integration server then pulls these changes and builds the system and also runs unit and integration tests. After this, the continuous integration server will now inform the team of the successful build. If the build or test fails, the continuous integration server will alert the team. The team will then try to fix the issue at the earliest opportunity. This process keeps on repeating, and this is the entire continuous integration pipeline in short. Moving on, why do you need a continuous integration of development and testing? For this answer, you should focus on the need of continuous integration. My suggestion would be to mention the most two important points. Firstly, continuous integration of development and testing improves the quality of software and reduces the time taken to deliver it by replacing the traditional practice of testing after completing all of the development. It also allows development team to easily detect and locate problems early because developers need to integrate code into a shared repository several times a day, that is more frequently. Each check-in is then automatically tested. Moving on to the third question, what are the success factors for continuous integration? Here you have to mention the requirements for continuous integration. You should include the following points. That is, continuous integration allows you to maintain a code repository. It automates the build, makes the build self-testing. In continuous integration, everyone commits to the baseline every single day. Every commit that is made to the baseline should be built. Keep the build fast. It is important to test in a clone of the production environment. It also makes it easy to get to the latest deliverables. Everyone can see the results of the latest builds. And finally, it automates deployment. The fourth question, explain how you can move or copy Jenkins from one server to another. Approach this task by copying the jobs directory from the old server to the new one. There are multiple ways to do that. You can firstly move a job from one installation of Jenkins to another by simply copying the corresponding job directory. You can also make a copy of an existing job by making a clone of a job directory by a different name. You can also rename an existing job by renaming a directory. It is also important to keep in mind that if you change a job name, you will need to change any other job that tries to call the rename job. In the fifth question, explain how can you create a backup and copy files in Jenkins. The answer to this question is really direct. To create a backup, all you need to do is to periodically back up your Jenkins home directory. This contains all of your build jobs configurations, your slave node configurations, and your build history. To create a backup of your Jenkins setup, just copy this directory. You can also copy a job directory to clone or replicate a job or rename the directory. I hope this is clear. Now let's move on to the sixth question of the session. Explain how you can set up Jenkins job. My approach to this answer will be first to mention how to create Jenkins job. Go to Jenkins top page, select new job, then choose build a freestyle software project. Then you can tell the elements of this freestyle job. Firstly, optional SCM such as CVS or subversion where your source code resides. Optional triggers to control when Jenkins will perform builds. Some sort of build script that performs the build where the real work really happens. Optional steps to collect information out of the build such as archiving the artifacts and or recording Java doc and test results. Optional steps to notify other people or systems with the build result such as sending emails, IMs, updating issue trackers, etc. Moving on, mention some of the useful plugins in Jenkins. Some of the useful important plugins are Maven 2 Project, Amazon EC2, HTML Publisher, Copy Artifact, Join, Greenballs. These plugins I feel are the most useful plugins. If you want to include any other plugins that is not mentioned, you can add them as well. But make sure you first mention the plugins that are on the screen right now. The next important question is, how will you secure Jenkins? If you have any other ways other than the ones that I'm just going to talk about, please mention it. So the standard way to secure Jenkins is firstly to ensure that the global security is on. Ensure that Jenkins is integrated with your company's user directory with appropriate plugin. Also ensure that the matrix or project matrix is enabled to fine-tune access. Then automate the process of setting rights or privileges in Jenkins with custom version control skipped. Limit physical access to Jenkins data or folders. Periodically run security audits on same. Jenkins is one of the most popular tools that are used extensively in DevOps. There are many other ways to secure Jenkins. If you have any other way, you could just explain that, or you could just explain the standard method. Now let's move on to the continuous testing questions. First question is, what is continuous testing? Continuous testing is the process of executing automated tests as part of the software delivery pipeline to obtain immediate feedback on the business risks associated with in the latest build. In this way, each build is tested continuously, allowing development teams to get fast feedback so that they can prevent those problems from progressing to the next stage of software delivery lifecycle. This dramatically speeds up a developer's workflow, as there's no need to manually rebuild the project and rerun all tests after making changes. Moving on to the next question, what is automation testing? What are the benefits of automation testing? Automation testing or test automation is a process of automating the manual process to test the application or system under test. Automation testing involves use of separate testing tools. It involves use of separate testing tools, which lets you create test scripts which can be executed repeatedly and does not require any manual intervention. Some of the benefits of automation testing are it supports execution of repeated test cases, it aids in testing a large test matrix, it also enables parallel execution, encourages unattended execution, improves accuracy, thereby reducing human-generated errors, and finally saves money and time. The next question is how to automate testing in DevOps lifecycle. In DevOps, developers are required to commit all the changes made in the source code to a shared repository. Continuous integration tools like Jenkins will pull the code from the shared repository every time a change is made in the code and eventually deploy it for continuous testing that is done by tools like Selenium. In this way, any change in the code is continuously tested, unlike the traditional approach. Let's move on and understand what are the key elements of continuous testing tools. The key elements of continuous testing tools are risk assessment, policy analysis, requirements traceability, advanced analysis, test optimization, and service virtualization. In risk assessment, it covers risk mitigation tasks, technical depth, quality assessment, and test coverage optimization to ensure the build is ready to progress towards next stage. Whereas in policy analysis, it ensures all processes aligned with the organization's evolving business and compliance demands are met. In requirements traceability, it ensures true requirements are met and rework is not required. An object assessment is used to identify which requirements are at risk, working as expected, or require further validation. Also, in advanced analysis, it uses automation in areas such as static code analysis, change impact analysis, and scope assessment or prioritization to prevent defects in the first place and accomplishing more within each iteration. In test optimization, it ensures tests yield accurate outcomes and provide actionable findings. Aspects include test data management, test optimization management, and test maintenance. Service virtualization ensures access to real-world testing environments. So it basically enables access to the virtual form of the required testing stages, cutting waste time to test environment setup and availability. Moving on to the next question, which testing tool are you comfortable with and what are the benefits of that tool? Here mention the testing tool that you have worked with and accordingly frame your answer. I will mention an example with Selenium. I have worked on Selenium to ensure high quality and more frequent releases. Some advantages of Selenium are that it is free and open source. It also has a large user base that helps communities. The major advantage is that it has cross-browser compatibility, that is Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Safari, etc. It also has great platform compatibility like in Windows, Mac, Linux, etc. It supports multiple programming languages like Java, C#, Ruby, Python, Perl, etc. It also has fresh and regular repository developments. And finally, the most important point, it supports distributed testing. Moving on to the next question, what are the testing types supported by Selenium? Selenium supports two types of testing. The first one being regression testing. It is the act of retesting a product around an area where a bug was fixed. The next one is functional testing. It refers to the testing of software features individually. The next question is, what is Selenium IDE? It is an integrated development environment for Selenium scripts. It is implemented as a Firefox extension and allows you to record, edit, and debug tests. Selenium IDE includes the entire Selenium core, allowing you to easily and quickly record and play back tests in the actual environment that they will run in. Now, include some advantages too in your answer. With autocomplete support and the ability to move commands around quickly, Selenium IDE is the ideal environment for creating Selenium tests, no matter what style of tests you prefer. Moving on to the next question, what is the difference between assert and verify commands in Selenium? First, we will talk about assert command. Assert command checks whether the given condition is true or false. Let's say we assert whether the given element is present on the web page or not. If the condition is true, then the program control will execute the next test step. But if the condition is false, the execution would stop and no further tests would be executed. The verify command also checks whether the given condition is true or false. Irrespective of the condition being true or false, the program execution does not halt. That is, any failure during verification would not stop the execution and all the test steps would be executed. Assert command is best used when the check value has to pass the test to be able to continue to run, whereas verify command is used to check non-critical things. How to launch browser using WebDriver? The following syntax can be used to launch browser. You can use the command WebDriver driver is equal to new Firefox driver function, or WebDriver driver is equal to new Chrome driver function, or you can also use WebDriver driver is equal to new Internet Explorer driver function. Moving on to the last question of continuous testing. When should one use Selenium Grid? For this answer, my suggestion would be to give a small definition of Selenium Grid. It can be used to execute same or different test scripts on multiple platforms and browsers concurrently to achieve distributed test execution. So this eventually allows testing under different environments and saving execution time remarkably. Now let's move on and check out how much you know about configuration management. What are the goals of configuration management process? The purpose of configuration management is to ensure the integrity of a product or system throughout its life cycle by making the development or deployment process controllable and repeatable, therefore creating a higher quality product or system. The configuration management process allows orderly management of system information and system changes for purposes such as to revise capability, improve performance, reliability or maintainability, extend life, reduce cost, reduce risk, and liability or correct defects. Let's move on to the next question, that is, what is the difference between asset management and configuration management? Asset management is concerned with finances, whereas configuration management is concerned with operations. Scope is everything you own in asset management, but scope is everything you deploy in configuration management. In asset management, it is interfaces to purchasing and leasing, whereas in configuration management, it is interfaces to ITIL processes. In asset management, you can maintain data for taxes, but in configuration management, you maintain data for troubleshooting. Lifecycle is from purchase to disposal in asset management, whereas in configuration management, lifecycle is from deployment to retirement. In asset management, relationships are only incidental, whereas in configuration management, relationships are all operational. Moving on to the third question, what do you understand by infrastructure as code? Infrastructure as code is a type of IT infrastructure that operations teams can use to automatically manage and provision through code rather than using a manual process. Companies for faster deployments treat infrastructure like software, as code that can be managed with the Devops tools and processes. These tools basically let you make infrastructure changes more easily, rapidly, safely, and reliably. Moving on to the most important question, which among Puppet, Chef, SaltStack, and Ansible is the best configuration management tool and why? This depends on the organization's need, so mention few points on all of these tools. Puppet is the oldest and most mature configuration management tool. Puppet is a Ruby-based configuration management tool, but while it has some free features, much of what makes Puppet great is only available in the paid version. Organizations that don't need a lot of extras will find Puppet useful, but those needing more customization will probably need to upgrade to the paid version. On the other hand, Chef is written in Ruby, so it can be customized by those who know the language. It also includes free features, plus it can be upgraded from open source to enterprise level if necessary. On top of that, it is a very flexible product. Ansible is a very secure option since it uses secure shell. It is a simple tool to use, but it does offer a number of other services in addition to configuration management. It is very easy to learn, so it is perfect for those who do not have a dedicated IT staff but still need a configuration management tool. SaltStack is Python-based open source configuration management tool made for larger businesses, but its learning curve is fairly low. Based on all of these tools and which you're comfortable with, you can just mention which is the best tool and why would you want to use it. The next question is, what is Puppet? Puppet is a configuration management tool which is used to automate administration tasks. Now you should describe its architecture and how Puppet manages its agents. Puppet has a master-slave architecture in which the slave has to first send a certificate signing request to master, and master has to sign that certificate in order to establish a secure connection between Puppet master and Puppet slave, as you can see in the diagram. Puppet slave sends request to Puppet master, and Puppet master then pushes configuration on slave. In the sixth question, before a client can authenticate with the Puppet master, its certificates need to be signed and accepted. How will you automate this task? The easiest way to do this is to enable auto signing in puppet.config. It is definitely a security risk, but if you still want to do this, you can firewall your Puppet master, that is restrict port TCP 8140 to only networks that you trust. Create Puppet masters for each trust zone and only include the trusted nodes in that Puppet master's manifest. Never use a full wildcard such as asterisk. Moving on to the seventh question, which open source or community tools do you use to make Puppet more powerful? Over here, you need to mention the tools and how you have used these tools to make Puppet more powerful. For example, changes and requests are ticketed through Jira and we manage requests through an internal process. Then we use Git and Puppet's code manager application to manage Puppet code in accordance with the best practices. Additionally, we run all of our Puppet changes through our continuous integration pipeline in Jenkins using the Beaker testing framework. The next important question is, what are Puppet manifests? It is a very important question, so make sure all of this is set in the correct flow. According to me, you should first define manifests. Every node or Puppet agent has got its configuration details in Puppet master written in the native Puppet language. These details are written in the language which Puppet can understand and are termed as manifests. They are composed of Puppet code and the file names use the pp extension. Now with an example, you can write a manifest in Puppet master that creates a file and installs Apache on all Puppet agents or slaves connected to the Puppet master. Moving on, what is Puppet module and how it is different from Puppet manifest? A Puppet module is a collection of manifests and data such as facts, files, and templates, and they have a specific directory structure. Modules are useful for organizing your Puppet code because they allow you to split your code into multiple manifests. It is considered best practice to use modules to organize almost all of your Puppet manifests. Puppet programs are called manifests, which are composed of Puppet code and their file names use the pp extension. Moving on to the 10th question, what is factor in Puppet? Factor gathers basic information, that is facts about Puppet agent, such as hardware details, network settings, operating system type and version, IP addresses, MAC addresses, SSH keys, and many more. These facts are then made available in Puppet master's manifests as variables. What is Chef? Chef is a very powerful automation platform that transforms infrastructure into code. Chef is a tool for which you write scripts that are used to automate processes. What processes? Pretty much anything that is related to IT. Now you can explain the architecture of Chef. It consists of Chef server, Chef node, and Chef workstation. The Chef server is the central store of your infrastructure's configuration data. The Chef server stores the data necessary to configure your nodes and provides Search, a powerful tool that allows you to dynamically drive a node configuration based on data. A node, on the other hand, is any host that is configured using Chef client. Chef client runs on your nodes, contacting the Chef server for the information necessary to configure the node. Since a node is a machine that runs the Chef client software, nodes are sometimes referred to as clients. Finally, a Chef workstation is the host you use to modify your cookbooks and other configuration data. In the 12th question, we're going to discuss what is a resource in Chef. A resource represents a piece of infrastructure and its desired state, such as a package that should be installed, a service that should be running, or a file that should be generated. The functions of resource are: it describes the desired state for a configuration item. It also declares the steps needed to bring that item to the desired state. It specifies a resource type such as package, template, or service. It also lists additional details also which are known as resource properties whenever it's necessary. They are also grouped into recipes which describe working configurations. What do you mean by recipe in Chef? A recipe is a collection of resources that describes a particular configuration or policy. So a recipe describes everything that is required to configure part of a system. Some of the functions of recipes are: it helps in installing and configuring software components, it manages files, it deploys applications, and it also executes other recipes. How does a cookbook differ from a recipe in Chef? A recipe is a collection of resources and primarily configures a software package or some piece of infrastructure. On the other hand, a cookbook groups together recipes and other information in a way that is way more manageable than having just recipes alone. What happens when you do not specify a resource action in Chef? Here, Chef really just applies the default action. You can explain this with an example. The first snippet is the same as the below resource because create is the file resource default action. What is Ansible module? Modules are considered to be the units of work in Ansible. Each module is mostly standalone and can be written in a standard scripting language such as Python, Perl, Ruby, Bash, etc. One of the guiding properties of modules is idempotency, which means that even if an operation is repeated multiple times, example, upon recovery from an outage, it will always place the system into the same state. Now, what are playbooks in Ansible? Playbooks are Ansible's configuration, deployment, and orchestration language. They can describe a policy you want your remote systems to enforce or a set of steps in a general IT process. Playbooks are designed to be human readable and are developed in a basic text language. At a basic level, playbooks can be used to manage configurations of and deployments to remote machines. In the picture on the screen, you can see an example of playbooks in Ansible. How do I see a list of all the Ansible variables? Ansible by default gathers facts about the machines under management, and these facts can be accessed in playbooks and in templates. To see a list of all the facts that are available about a machine, you can run the setup module as an ad hoc action. That is Ansible-m setup hostname. This will print out a dictionary of all the facts that are available for that particular host. How do I turn the auto deployment feature off? The auto deployment feature checks the applications folder every 3 seconds to determine whether there are any new applications or changes to the existing applications and then dynamically deploys these changes. The auto deployment feature is enabled for servers that run in development mode. To disable auto deployment feature, use one of the following methods to place servers in production mode. That is, in the administration control, click the name of the domain in the left pane, then click the production mode checkbox in the right pane. At the command line, include the following argument when starting the domain's administration server. That is -D weblogic.production mode enabled is equal to true. Also, the production mode is set for all WebLogic server instances in a given domain. The last question in configuration management is, when should I use the external stage option? Set external stage using weblogic.deployer if you want to stage the application yourself and prefer to copy it to its target by your own means. Now let's test your knowledge on continuous monitoring. The first question is, why is continuous monitoring necessary? Continuous monitoring allows timely identification of problems or weaknesses and quick corrective action that helps reduce expenses of an organization. Continuous monitoring provides a solution that addresses 3 operational disciplines known as continuous audit, continuous controls monitoring, and continuous transaction inspection. The next really important question is, what is Nagios? Nagios is one of the monitoring control tools. It is used for continuous monitoring of systems, applications, services, and business processes, etc. It is used for continuous monitoring of systems, applications, services, and business processes in a DevOps culture. In the event of a failure, Nagios can alert technical staff of the problem, allowing them to begin remediation processes before outages affect business processes, end users, or customers. With this tool, you do not have to explain why an unseen infrastructure outage affects your organization's bottom line. Now, once you've defined what is Nagios, you can mention the various things that you can achieve using this tool. You can plan for infrastructure upgrades before outdated systems cause failures. They can also respond to issues at the first sign of a problem. You can also automatically fix problems when they are detected, coordinate technical team responses, and also ensure your organization's SLAs are being met. How does 𝐑𝐤𝐿 work? 𝐑𝐤𝐿 runs on a server, usually as a daemon or service. 𝐑𝐤𝐿 periodically runs plugins residing on the same server. They contact hosts or servers on your network or on the internet. One can view the status information using the web interface. You can also receive email or SMS notification if something happens. The daemon behaves like a scheduler that runs certain scripts at certain moments. It stores the results of the scripts and will run other scripts if these results change. Now expect a few questions on 𝐑𝐤𝐿's components like plugins, NRPE, etc. What are plugins in 𝐑𝐤𝐿? They are scripts like Perl scripts, shell scripts, etc. that can run from a command line to check the status of a host or service. 𝐑𝐤𝐿 uses the results from plugins to determine the current statuses of hosts and services on your network. Once you have defined plugins, explain why you need it. 𝐑𝐤𝐿 will execute a plugin whenever there is a need to check the status of a host or service. Plugin will perform the check and then simply returns the result to 𝐑𝐤𝐿. 𝐑𝐤𝐿 will process the results that it receives from the plugin and take necessary actions. The next important question is, what is NRPE in 𝐑𝐤𝐿? That is 𝐑𝐤𝐿's Remote Plugin Executor. The NRPE add-on is designed to allow you to execute 𝐑𝐤𝐿's plugins on remote Linux or Unix machines. The main reason for doing this is to allow 𝐑𝐤𝐿 to monitor local resources like CPU, load, memory usage, etc. on remote machines. Since these public resources are not usually exposed to external machines, an agent like NRPE must be installed on the remote Linux or Unix machines. I advise you to explain the NRPE architecture based on the diagram that is given here. The NRPE add-on consists of two pieces: the check NRPE plugin, which resides on the local monitoring machine, and the NRPE daemon, which runs on the remote Linux or Unix machine. There is also a SSL connection, that is a secure socket layer between monitoring host and remote host as seen in the diagram. What do you mean by passive check in 𝐑𝐤𝐿? Passive checks are usually initiated and performed by external applications or processes. Also, the results are submitted to 𝐑𝐤𝐿 for processing. They are useful for monitoring services that are asynchronous in nature and cannot be monitored effectively by polling their status on a regularly scheduled basis. They can also be used for monitoring services that are located behind a firewall and cannot be checked actively from the monitoring host. The next question is, when does 𝐑𝐤𝐿 check for external commands? 𝐑𝐤𝐿 checks for external commands under the following conditions: at regular intervals specified by the command check interval option in the main configuration file, or immediately after event handlers are executed. This is in addition to the regular cycle of external command checks and is done to provide immediate action if any event handler submits commands to 𝐑𝐤𝐿. Moving on, what is the difference between active and passive check in 𝐑𝐤𝐿? For this answer, first point out the basic difference between active and passive checks. The major difference between active and passive checks is that active checks are initiated and performed by 𝐑𝐤𝐿, while the passive checks are performed by external applications. If your interviewer is looking unconvinced with the above explanation, then you can also mention some key features of both active and passive checks. Passive checks are useful for monitoring services that are asynchronous in nature and cannot be monitored effectively by polling their status on a regularly scheduled basis. They're usually located behind a firewall and cannot be checked actively from the monitoring host. The main features of active checks are that they're initiated by the 𝐑𝐤𝐿 process. Active checks are run on a regularly scheduled basis. I hope the differences between active and passive checks is clear, and as you can see on the screen, these are the two different pictures of how active and passive checks really work. The ninth question is, how does 𝐑𝐤𝐿 help with distributed monitoring? The interviewer will be expecting an answer related to the distributed architecture of 𝐑𝐤𝐿, so I suggest that you answer it by explaining that first. With 𝐑𝐤𝐿, you can monitor your whole enterprise by using a distributed monitoring scheme in which local slave instances of 𝐑𝐤𝐿 perform monitoring tasks, and report the results back to a single master. You manage all configuration, notification, and reporting from the master while the slaves do all the work. This design takes advantage of 𝐑𝐤𝐻's ability to utilize passive checks, that is, external applications or processes that send results back to 𝐑𝐤𝐻. In a distributed configuration, these external applications are other instances of 𝐑𝐤𝐻. Moving on, explain main configuration file of 𝐑𝐤𝐻 and its location. The main configuration file contains a number of directives that affect how the 𝐑𝐤𝐻 daemon operates. This config file is read by both the 𝐑𝐤𝐻 daemon and the CGIs. It basically specifies the location of your main configuration file. Now you can tell where it is present and how it is created. A sample main configuration file is created in the base directory of the 𝐑𝐤𝐻 distribution when you run the configure script. The default name of the main configuration file is 𝐑𝐤𝐻.cfg. It is usually placed in the etc/sub directory of your 𝐑𝐤𝐻 installation. Explain how flap detection works in 𝐑𝐤𝐻. Flapping occurs when a service or host changes state too frequently. This causes a lot of problem and recovery notifications. Once you have defined flapping, explain how 𝐑𝐤𝐻 detects flapping. Whenever 𝐑𝐤𝐻 checks the status of a host or service, it will check to see if it has started or stopped flapping. 𝐑𝐤𝐻 follows a procedure to do that. Firstly, it stores the results of the last 21 checks of the host or service, analyzing the historical check results, and determines where state changes or transitions occur, using the state transitions to determine a % state change value for the host or service. Finally, it will compare the % state change value against low and high flapping thresholds. A host or service is determined to have started flapping when its % state change first exceeds a high flapping threshold. A host or service is determined to have stopped flapping when its % state goes below a low flapping threshold. Now, what are the three main variables that affect recursion and inheritance in 𝐑𝐤𝐻? Name, user, and register. Name is a placeholder that is used by other objects. Use defines the parent object whose properties should be used. Register can have a value of 0, indicating it's only a template, and 1, which is an actual object. It's important to know that the register value is never inherited. I hope the three main variables that affect inheritance and recursion in 𝐑𝐤𝐻 is clear. Moving on. Let us understand what is meant by saying 𝐑𝐤𝐻 is object-oriented. One of the features of 𝐑𝐤𝐻 is object configuration format, in that you can create object definitions that inherit properties from other object definitions and hence the name. This basically simplifies and clarifies relationships between various components. Now, the last question in continuous monitoring is, what is state stalking in 𝐑𝐤𝐻? State stalking is used for logging purposes. When stalking is enabled for a particular host or service, 𝐑𝐤𝐻 will watch that host or service very carefully and log any changes it sees in the output of check results. It can be very helpful in later analysis of the log files. Under normal circumstances, the result of a host or service check is only logged if the host or service has changed state since it was last checked. Now we're moving on to the last topic of today's session, and let's see how much you know about containers and virtual machines. So what are containers? Containers are used to provide consistent computing environment from a developer's laptop to a test environment, from a staging environment into production. A container consists of an entire runtime environment, an application, plus all its dependencies, libraries, and other binaries and configuration files needed to run it, bundled into one package. Containerizing the application platform and its dependencies removes the differences in operating system distributions and underlying infrastructure. Now let's move on to the second question and discuss what are the advantages that containerization provides over virtualization. Containers provide real-time provisioning and scalability, but virtual machines provide slow provisioning. Containers are also lightweight when compared to virtual machines. Virtual machines have limited performance when compared to containers. Containers have better resource utilization compared to virtual machines. These are some of the advantages that containerization provides over virtualization. Moving on, how exactly are containers, that is Docker in our case, different from hypervisor virtualization? What are the benefits? Hypervisor virtualization and default security support are to a great degree, but containers have a slightly less degree over here. In a hypervisor virtualization, the complete operating system plus applications are in memory on disk, whereas in containers, only the application requirements are on disk. Time taken to start up is substantially longer in hypervisor virtualization because it requires boot of operating system plus applications loading. Whereas in containers, it's shorter because only apps need to start as kernel is already running. Hypervisor virtualization is portable with proper preparation, whereas in container, it is portable within image format. It is typically smaller. In hypervisor virtualization, it has its own operating system, whereas in containers, it uses the host operating system. Moving on, let's discuss the fourth question, that is, what is Docker image? Docker image is the source of Docker container. In other words, Docker images are used to create containers. Images are created with the build command, and they'll eventually produce a container when started with run. Images are stored in a Docker registry such as registry.hub.docker.com. Because they can become quite large, images are designed to be composed of layers of other images, allowing a minimal amount of data to be sent when transferring images over the network. Also, I suggest you must be aware of Docker Hub in order to answer these questions on pre-available images. The next question is, what is Docker container? Docker containers include the application and all of its dependencies, but share the kernel with other containers, running as isolated processes in user space on the host operating system. Docker containers are not tied to any specific infrastructure. They run on any computer, on any infrastructure, and in any cloud. So Docker containers can be created by either creating a Docker image and then running it, or you can use Docker images that are present on the Docker Hub. Docker containers are basically runtime instances of Docker images. Moving on to the sixth question, what is Docker Hub? Docker Hub is a cloud-based registry service which allows you to link to code repositories, build your images and test them, stores manually pushed images, and links to Docker Cloud so you can deploy images to your host. You can think of Docker Hub as how GitHub is to Git. It also provides a centralized resource for container image discovery, distribution, and change management, user and team collaboration, and workflow automation throughout the development pipeline. Moving on, how is Docker different from other container technologies? Docker containers are extremely easy to deploy in a cloud. It can get more applications running on the same hardware than other technologies. It makes it easy for developers to quickly create, ready to run containerized application, and it makes managing and deploying applications much easier. You can even share containers with your application. You can add some more points to this answer if you want to. Moving on, another important question is, what is Docker Swarm? Docker Swarm is native clustering for Docker, which turns a pool of Docker hosts into a single virtual Docker host. Docker Swarm serves the standard Docker API. Any tool that already communicates with a Docker daemon can use Swarm to transparently scale to multiple hosts. Some supported tools in Docker Swarm are Doku, Docker Compose, Docker Machine, Jenkins. Moving on, what is Dockerfile used for? Docker can build images automatically by reading the instructions from a Docker file. A Docker file is a text document that contains all the commands a user could call on the command line to assemble an image. Using Docker build, users can create an automated build that executes several command line instructions in succession. Next question is, can I use JSON instead of YAML for my compose file in Docker? You can use JSON instead of YAML for your compose file. To use JSON file with compose, specify the file name to use. For example, you can use the command docker compose -f docker compose.json up. Now, how to create Docker container? We can use Docker image to create Docker container by using the command docker run -t-i image name and the command name. This command will create and start your container. You should also add, if you want to check the list of all running container with status on a host, use the command docker ps-a. Now, how to stop and restart the Docker container? In order to stop the Docker container, you can use the command docker stop container ID. Now, to restart the Docker container, you can simply use docker restart container ID. So basically, you use the keywords stop and restart here. How far do Docker containers scale? Large web developments like Google and Twitter and platform providers such as .cloud all run on container technology at a scale of hundreds of thousands or even millions of containers running in parallel. The last question of today is, what platforms does Docker run on? Docker runs on Linux and cloud platforms. Linux platforms like Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch Linux, CentOS, etc. And even on cloud platforms like Amazon EC2, Google Compute Engine, Microsoft Azure, Rackspace, etc. With this, we're going to talk about the last topic of today's session, DevOps certification. DevOps training certification helps anyone who aspires to make a career as a DevOps engineer. Various DevOps tools, including Git, Jenkins, Docker, Ansible, Puppet, Kubernetes, and Nagios. This training is completely hands-on and designed in a way to help you become a certified practitioner through best practices in continuous development, continuous testing, configuration management, and continuous integration. And finally, continuous monitoring of software through its development lifecycle. I hope you had a great time in this session of DevOps interview. My name is Kavya. Until next time, thank you.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!